Look at the modern Oval Office. Today, the commanders-in-chief are fueled by aggressively branded, non-alcoholic beverages. Donald Trump notoriously kept a button on his desk to summon one of his 12 daily Diet Cokes, while Joe Biden relies on a constant supply of orange Gatorade to stay hydrated. But turn the clock back, and the executive branch ran on a much higher proof. John Adams kicked off every single morning by chugging alcoholic hard cider before lunch. Even up to the mid-20th century, Harry Truman started his day with an eye-opener, a heavy shot of bourbon mixed straight into his morning orange juice. How did the highest office in the United States go from a functional frat house to the most aggressively sober workplace on the planet? For America's first leaders, avoiding water was entirely a matter of biology. Early Washington, D.C. infrastructure was primitive, meaning the local drinking water was frequently contaminated with deadly bacteria. Zachary Taylor learned that the hard way. During a blistering 4th of July celebration in 1850, he tried to cool off with a bowl of iced milk and fresh cherries. Because the fruit was washed in tainted D.C. water, Taylor fell violently ill and died just 5 days later. The most successful early statesmen survived by treating alcohol as their primary hydration. George Washington drank Madeira, a sweet Portuguese wine, and shipped it in by the barrel. When the British taxed it, he simply smuggled it instead to keep his supply flowing. In the founding era, draining a barrel of fortified wine didn't ruin your political reputation. It meant you were taking basic precautions to stay alive. As the nation's borders expanded westward, the political utility of alcohol adapted. To connect with rugged frontier voters, a candidate had to prove they could handle a stiff drink alongside the common man. By 1829, this populist binge reached the executive mansion. Andrew Jackson's inauguration drew thousands of supporters to the White House for a celebration completely fueled by whiskey punch. The crowd grew so rowdy they smashed the china and tore down the curtains. This handkerchief shows how Harrison capitalized on drinking culture. Mocked as an out-of-touch general happy in a log cabin with hard cider, his campaign printed the insults on merchandise. Look at the repeating cider barrels. It proved he wasn't elitist. By the early 20th century, public temperance movements successfully pushed the country into prohibition. But while federal agents were smashing barrels in the streets, the Oval Office operated under a completely different set of rules. Woodrow Wilson signed the very legislation enforcing a dry nation, yet he quietly maintained his own personal stash of Scotch whiskey. When he left office, he secured special congressional approval to transport his liquor to his new home, completely bypassing the laws he enacted. Warren G. Harding was even more blatant. He hosted weekly White House poker nights where he freely poured bootleg liquor for his guests. The whiskey he served was often confiscated stock seized during government raids, meaning the president was happily drinking the evidence. Prohibition revealed a stark double standard. Alcohol had become a private executive privilege, reserved for the men in power, while they forced a strictly dry morality onto the American public. As the 20th century progressed, the demands of the office escalated. Facing the pressure of global wars and the nuclear standoff of the Cold War, a casual drink evolved into a mandatory coping mechanism for sheer survival. Franklin D. Roosevelt relied heavily on his evening cocktail ritual. During the intense geopolitical negotiations of the 1943 Tehran Conference, FDR played bartender himself, mixing his signature dirty martinis to navigate the grueling conversations with Winston Churchill and Joseph Stalin. Lyndon B. Johnson managed the immense stress of his administration by cruising aggressively around his Texas ranch, requiring his Secret Service detail to constantly refill his large, ice-filled Scotch and soda highballs through the car window. But using alcohol to numb the job's psychological toll often led to tragedy. Years earlier, Franklin Pierce watched his young son die right before taking office. Paralyzed by grief and the pressures of the presidency, he leaned entirely on rum and whiskey, eventually drinking himself to death from liver disease. For these leaders, the inescapable, grinding pressure of the office made the bottle one of the few reliable outlets for immediate relief. Eventually, the sheer speed of the modern world rendered that coping mechanism obsolete. The rise of the 24/7 news cycle and the reality of the nuclear launch codes meant that presidential intoxication was no longer an accepted quirk. It was a massive national security threat. Jimmy Carter recognized this changing reality. Coming from a family with a history of alcoholism, He responded to the new political landscape by running one of the driest administrations on record, sticking strictly to iced tea and milk. Decades later, George W. Bush made a similar calculation. He spent his younger years heavily consuming what he called the 4 Bs: beer, bourbon, B&B liqueur, and black velvet whiskey. But at age 40, he preemptively quit drinking entirely to ensure complete sobriety before taking on the presidency. The margin for error had simply vanished. The modern executive branch demands total, relentless mental clarity, putting a definitive end to the days when a commander-in-chief could safely be seen stumbling. While actual drinking behind the resolute desk has plummeted, the image of a beverage remains a highly controlled political tool. Barack Obama leaned into this by commissioning the White House Honey Ale, the first presidential homebrew. By using honey straight from the South Lawn beehives, he signaled a grounded, DIY relatability to the public. Modern teetotalers like Trump and Biden treat their drinks as recognizable signatures. The push-button Diet Cokes and fluorescent bottles of Gatorade function as personal icons, signaling specific, predictable habits to their respective bases. This shift tracks the evolution of the office itself. The glass that once held a survival tactic or a private escape now holds a carefully selected